Let's say, hey, I'm ready to make a jump. I want to go to a startup. I'm sold, but where? Where do I go? I would say three go to market strategies actually are what you should look at first. And when I say go to market strategy, as designers, we're not often on the commercial side. We don't often use that terminology, but these are the ways companies are set up, right? How they sell their product. Every company is selling.
Hi guys, my name is Emmanuel and welcome to the Growth Design Podcast, where you get to learn about growth design, its principles through experienced product leaders and growth experts, and how they have implemented growth design and its best practices in their organizations and product at large. In today's section, my guest is Christensen, formerly head of design at a two startup with 10 years of experience. He now runs his own growth design consultancy, specializing in engagement, retention, flow at early stage startup. In today's section, we discuss growth design at an early stage startup. We discuss various stages of startup and its attributes with respect to growth. We also discuss what a growth designer should look for when designing to join a startup and how to honor your craft as a growth designer at an early stage startup. Welcome to the show, Scott. Super excited to have you.
Hey, Emmanuel. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, Scott. So can you tell us a little bit about your incredible experience journey so far as a growth leader?
Yeah, for sure. So I've been in the growth design community now for about 5 years, helping to lead growthdesigners.co. That's been on as a volunteer, but as for full-time employment, I've been the head of product design, two startups, most recently H1, a healthcare B2B SaaS software startup, as well as Mystery, which is in the entertainment space here in Seattle. Prior to that, I was at Expedia, so worked in the travel space on a parallel growth team, as well as before that working at PwC. So that was a digital consultancy section of that giant company, multi-conglomerate global company. But I worked on some new ventures there, small 0 to 1 products that we went to market with. So that's a little bit about my background.
That's amazing, and that's really sums up your sort of experience. You're looking at different aspects, different field that you really touched on. You talked about the traveling industry, you talked about the entertainment, and also the art. That's really a wide sort of experience for a designer, and I think that's really really great. So let's dive deep into the conversation, talking about growth for startups, for early stage startup. As a specialist and a growth leader, can you briefly explain different stages of a startup?
Yeah, for sure. I recently just posted on growthdesigners.co about this, but I guess early in my career, I didn't really understand just how important the environment was that I was operating in. And not until later in my career, I'm 10 plus years into my career, have I realized that the environment of the company that you're working in really determines a lot of your perspective and the skill sets that you learn as a designer. Good habits, bad habits, oftentimes are kind of adopted from the environment that you're in. So when it comes to the stage of company, it really determines a lot of kind of your perspective. So to your question of explaining a little bit of the differences, I could definitely go into the nuances between those. Yeah, early stage, typically you're going to have a certain set of experiences versus later stage is going to be more specialized. You're going to be you're going to go from generalized to more specialized up that spectrum. So yeah, happy to dive into the nuance there if you'd like.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the big attributes or like the key feature of an early stage startup is that they're always kind of small. The team is not that large, so most of the time as a designer or as a good designer on that team, it means you're going to be doing a lot of works. We don't have sort of special designers for each specs of the funnel. So you might have to do a lot compared to where you work at a very big, or let's say like a big company when where they have a lot of team and you are able to sort of work on a particular, let's say, good funnel, and that might be your specialty, and which you rightly said. So looking at an early stage startup, right? What does growth really means to an early stage startup?
Yeah, that's a great question. Growth can mean different things to different people. And I think growth always at the end of the day comes down to making strategic business impact using our special skill of design, right? And so at the end of the day, it all boils down to understanding your user, being able to understand business needs as well, and then marrying those two. It's no different than regular product design. However, at an early stage startup, startup, the more business inclined you are, the more impact you'll be able to have because you are given such autonomy. At an earlier stage company, you're going to have more ownership. Like you mentioned, you're going to work across work streams. You're going to maybe own the entire onboarding funnel or the entire acquisition and engagement segments of growth rather than just, retention or something like that. Like you're going to own a lot more. The more ownership you have, the better you can meet both business and user needs, the more impact you're going to be able to have.
Right. Okay. Looking at an early stage startup, right? What are the common challenges that you've seen early stage startup face regarding achieving that level of, like, call it growth mindset or achieving
Yeah.
success?
Yeah, I think a few things. So from my experience, I was at a seed stage startup that was, just getting Series A funding. And from that experience, I learned that, growth at that stage is not true growth in the sense of maybe the way that we typically think of it. And what I mean by that is the earlier stage you go, the more it blends into a generalist role. And there becomes a point where it's not really like growth is just one of the dozens of things that you're doing. So if you really are wanting to focus on growth in your personal career, seed stage, Series A, even some Series B companies, you may become too generalized to the point where you're just operating across a whole spectrum of things. But to your question, what are some of the challenges? I think that's a personal challenge for a career. And then secondly, I think tests, really like rigorous analysis, you're not going to get as much of that at an earlier stage company. Sometimes there's a lot of, licking the finger, putting it up in the air and going with a gut call. I think one of the beauties of that is that you don't get hung up on testing everything and you can move quickly. It does leave room for kind of biases to kick in. However, if you can keep the most important and the most pivotal things still in test buckets and being able to A/B test those types of things, then I think you're in a good startup environment. However, there is like definite creep into, just running fast, feature factory, building as much as you can without testing anything. And that's where you start to run into some trouble when it comes to growth design at early stage.
Yeah. Okay. I don't want us to dive a little bit into that, but let's just move forward because I think there's a question that ties back to what you just said now. So I will come back to that a little bit. Looking at an early stage startup still, based on your experience, how best can a small team approach growth effectively? Looking at so many constraints that they have, how can they maximize their strength as the growth?
Yeah, great question. So I think the team dynamic is a lot of your reality in any organization that you work in. And what I mean by that is, you don't quit the job. If you're moving on, you're quitting the team, you're quitting your manager, you're quitting those people that are immediately around you. So you definitely want to surround yourself with a great team. And to your point, earlier stage teams can sometimes be resource constrained. Startups can't invest in every specialized role. You're going to need to share teammate kind of responsibilities in a smaller team, right? Like you're going to have overlap with data analysts. You're going to have to be doing your own user research. You may not have a brand marketing person or brand communication designer. Heck, you might not even have a PM yet on the team, right? Like you might be doing a little bit of everything as a designer. When I was at Mystery, I learned to write SQL queries. I don't claim to be great at that, but I needed to get data, right? And I needed to be able to understand the drop-offs in the onboarding flow. I needed to understand some of the key data points. And so I learned some very basic SQL queries so that I could unblock myself. So you're gonna need to have some dynamic grit, I guess you could say, to move through some of the blockers. Otherwise, on a smaller team, you may throw your hands up and say, I'm just gonna go with my gut here, right? Back to the previous thought around biases and things like that kicking in. If you can't get the data, sometimes that can be a blocker, but you may just have to unblock yourself with some self-serve tools.
Yeah, great. I was going to ask about prioritization in terms of being the only designer in an early stage startup, owing the fact that you'll be doing a lot of things. So how do you now sort of deal with prioritization?
Prioritization is always a challenge, no matter if you're at a startup or a big company. You're always going to have a thousand things maybe pulling you in opposing directions. Obviously, ideally, you're in an environment where you have a product manager counterpart that you're working with to balance these conversations. And there's some simple frameworks out there like ICE or RICE. Those are impact versus effort matrices, things like that. However, I think for the startup phase, and prioritization there, it really comes down to deeming what is the most pivotal thing and trying to really test it. Doing some simple A/B tests. There's some tools out there that can help do that, but also thinking about cohorts, how you can really make some simple, be able to like simply bucket people who are using the application to find out just some general litmus tests as to where to make impact.
Yeah.
So it's never going to be a perfect science, but
Yeah.
I think I think those are some general rules to follow.
Yeah, I think I got that. You talked about effort to impact metrics where you sort of lay out some of those things and sort of measure what required the least effort and could really bring the big impact. I think that's really a very good way to also look at it. Just a little bit question about this constraint thing. So one of the bedrock of growth design is sort of the use of data. And in most cases, right, early stage startup might not have quite a large number of data, that is statistically significant to draw out insight from, right? In such scenario, how can you as a designer or as a team overcome this constraint of low amount of data to infer from? How can a team overcome this constraint?
Yeah, it's probably the perennial problem of an earlier stage company that doesn't have like mass market adoption, tons of users that can reach statistical significance in a matter of like a week.
Yeah.
Like these are that is a perennial challenge. I think undoubtedly you have to lean on more qualitative measures just in lieu of the quantitative lack of quantitative clarity there. However, you can definitely get some I do think that you can find some sense even in, low, it can point you in the right direction and get you started to have the conversations, have the user research interviews to help you dig into more qualitative findings. So I don't think it's something that you can hang your hat on. I know a lot of organizations that get really big. When I was at Expedia, it was all quantitative. Like whenever we ran a test, we would not release the feature if certain KPIs weren't met and if there wasn't certain statistical significance, proving that, whatever KPI improved, even if it was just marginal, right? It wouldn't, it was a very rigorous, probably too rigorous now that I think about it. And hence, you see my career arc. I went there and I was like, oh man, it's like, and that's one of the downsides in my kind of decision framework. If you get a little frustrated with testing micro copy and really small things and waiting for weeks and months for statistical significance to come back, like big companies might not be for you. I don't know, unless you get a little bit higher up, maybe you're leading teams or things like that, maybe it makes more sense to go to a larger company. But if you really want boots on the ground, like get your hands dirty, there's a sweet spot there. Series growth stage startups, series B, C, D, they're going to have more statistical significance, yet they'll also balance it obviously with more qualitative measures too.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Qualitative measure is the way to go. I think it's just like what you said. It's fun because instead of just staring at graphs and data and numbers, it gives you the opportunity to actually be in front of those customers, talk to them, get their feedbacks. And I think, that's one of the ways to kind of overcome that concern. And that's absolutely correct from you. So let's dive into a growth designer at an early stage startup. How do I on my craft as a growth designer at an early stage startup?
Yeah, it's a good question. Growth can, like I mentioned earlier, it can kind of bleed into traditional product design the earlier you go because startups are they're going to need that. All that to say, that doesn't mean that you can't really lean into your growth specialization. I think to the point of making an impact, how do I really deepen my growth specialization? Just do the things that growth designers do with the resources that you have, right? Get into the data, work with your team, if you have a data analyst, work with your PM, strategize, think about the ways that you can optimize funnels and flows and loops. Think about the same things that you would do if you were at a larger company and just apply it to the situation that you're in at the smaller organization. You may have to compromise on a few things and you may be a little bit more liberal in your testing confidence intervals. If you even are set up to do A/B testing, things like that. I've been at a Series B company that hadn't really, invested in testing, and data analytics was still, and instrumentation was still kind of fuzzy, and that's going to happen. But just roll with it with whatever organization you're in. And if it's not what you're liking, I think the key point here is look for the next opportunity. If you like the startup environment, if you're feeling like a career jump is needed, you want to still stay in startups, ask yourself the hard questions and start to think about what do you really want. And it might be to jump to a bigger company, or it might just be to jump to a different company within the same type of realm.
Okay, so from what I got from what you said right now, it's about you trying to find what you really love doing. But here is another phase to look at the question. Owing the fact that you are at an early stage startup and let's say you really enjoy it out there, what will you say? What will you advise to be that particular skill set that you need to sort of have more when you're working at a very big company?
Mm,
Definitely might have to
yeah,
specialize at an early stage startup. What do you think as a growth designer? What skill set do you think is mostly important? There are so many
yeah.
skills out there, but what do you think is that area as a growth designer at an early stage startup that you should really specialize in that can give you much impact?
Business strategy. It's got to be understanding the business, and that goes for any organization. But definitely in an earlier stage startup, you need to understand to be able to actively contribute to the business strategy. Do you need to be a PM? No. Do you need to be the CEO? Of course not. However, you should be able to speak to the key goals of the company. You're in a smaller environment. It should be easier for you to talk to the key stakeholders that understand the mission and the direction of the company and some of the key pillars and of the organizational structure and where you're moving towards. But the more you understand about the strategic direction, KPIs, competitors, how you play in the market, it's going to make you a lot more competitive and just more relevant, honestly. And you will become much less of like a production designer that's just implementing growth tests that somebody else came up with, right? You should, and I think that's a key underlying point here is like you should be close enough and understand the strategy enough so that you are actually proposing a lot of maybe some of the said solutions, right? As a designer, you're a professional diverger and solutioner, whereas maybe some others on the team are identifying problems using the data that they have or some of the road mapping strategies and capabilities that they're doing like a PM would do. But yeah, at the end of the day, understanding business strategy is key in an early stage startup to make huge impact in your career and in the company.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think that's really a great insight and it's value back there. There's some salient point that you sort of eat there, but I would just nail on the aspect that you so much lay emphasis on, which is the strategy. I think it's one of the fastest way to really make impacts, apart from some other skill set you can have as a good designer. So looking at different startup that you can consider, like what are those, will I call it metrics, or what are those things that you should scale out to really know what startup is does fit your particular skill set?
Yeah, I love that question. So yeah, let's say, hey, I'm ready to make a jump. I want to go to a startup. I'm sold, but where? Where do I go? I would say 3 go-to-market strategies actually are what you should look at first. And when I say go-to-market strategy, as designers, we're not often on the commercial side. We don't often use that terminology, but these are the ways companies are set up, right? How they sell their product. Every company is selling a product or service. So first, I think you need to look at B2C companies, business to consumer. These are your creme de la creme when it comes to growth. These are inherently in products that are anybody can download and use, right? And the reason that B2C startups, I think if you peel it back a little bit, B2C startups have typically a low average revenue per user. This is ARPU, as they say in the Reforge world. And consequently, they optimize for viral acquisition tactics, among other growth loops. They heavily invest in growth teams. So you're going to see a lot of B2C startups hiring for growth once they get to Series B. And so getting in early is a great call as you can grow with that team. So that's the first category and 2 others here. So we've all heard product-led growth, may not know exactly what that is, but for B2B SaaS startups, product-led growth is all the rage right now. And it's for good reason, right? Like we are all familiar with old crappy enterprise SaaS tools, cough, cough, Concur, and others. But the good news is that, most industries in the last 5 years or so have started to employ, there's been startups that have started to nip at the heels of some of these old school incumbents, and they are employing a product-led sales motion. So these are essentially just taking the B2C aspects of acquisition and viral loops and things like that, and starting from the bottoms up within B2B SaaS companies. These are your Airtables, Notions, Calendly's, etc. And so we've definitely seen a huge rise in those. And if you get in there, you're going to be in rocket ship career trajectory as a growth designer. And then lastly, I would just say lastly here it would be around to be wary of B2B sales-led startups. I've made that decision before to jump to lead a team at a B2B SaaS startup and found it very frustrating because growth was not necessarily a portion of the work there. You're going to be hard pressed to do true growth in a B2B sales led because it's top down. Sales folks are selling the product and you can sometimes sell a subpar user experience. So that's, I think, something that we all learn over time. So that I think that's where I would start, is the kind of thinking about go-to-market sales motions of different startups that you're interested in.
Okay, so looking at the last, what was it called, sort of warning that you gave. So when you say being wary of the sales-led B2B startups, right, as a growth designer, but how about when you have, there are sort of different product-led strategies nowadays. We have the PLG and PLS, product-led
Yeah.
sales,
Yep.
right? So are you saying that the growth designer should also be wary of being in that particular? Because I feel like if you have a product-led sales sort of strategy or framework as a company or model, do you think a growth designer can still thrive in that? Yeah, definitely. Maybe a strictly sales-led B2B startup might be like a danger zone, right? Because you can't really thrive there. But what about a product-led sales
Yeah.
team? Do you think a growth designer can really thrive in that sort of startup?
Yeah, yeah, I think you can. And you're touching on an interesting kind of new segment that's popped up in probably the last year or two. There's companies like PwC that are out there kind of leading the forefront of product-led sales, which for those listeners who may not know, product-led sales is essentially sales teams that are enabled through a product assist. So you see like demo, sign up for demo, things like that. This is a little bit more than that. It starts to qualify the candidates in product and then hands off to the sales folks. I think that's a wonderful place to practice growth. I think it's a beautiful hybrid of sort. In fact,
Exactly.
I foresee a lot of B2B SaaS companies going this direction, in the next decade or so. And I think the reason is it's finally starting to, like, there's different gradations here. Like, it's not all PLG or all B2B top-down sales, right? Like, it's not one or it's not mutually exclusive. These are just the two kind of opposite ends of the spectrum. I think every company in the B2B SaaS world will employ more than just one of those over time, right? You see companies that are traditionally PLG start to employ sales teams. Like, I was talking to a friend who is a sales engineer at Shopify. Shopify's typically always been like self-serve, product-led, and she's been hired on as a sales engineer there to start to upsell into higher tier markets, enterprise clients, bring on bigger ticket whales of customers. And I think PLS, product-led sales, is going to help kind of meet in the middle, create more gradations along the spectrum of PLG versus top-down B2B sales. So yes, I think to answer your question, it'd be a great place to be as a growth designer.
Yeah, perfect. Perfect. I'm safe. Sort of, yeah, because I guess that's what of the model of my current job sort of playing, and it's been fun because there are so many. Just like you said, I think it's just a midway between companies that are sales led and product led self serve team. I think it's sort of a way to find the balance because sometimes even most PLG still applies PLS. In some ways still have their sales
Yeah.
team sort outreach and everything. So I think
I mean,
it's
they have to, because at the end of the
yeah.
day, the product can sell to most folks, but at the end of the day, you're going to have to start getting in sales folks to really like shepherd the process for bigger tier clients, those,
Yeah.
that just like don't fit the mold of the PLG model, and they're going to want that revenue, right? Every company's
Yeah.
going to want that. So, yeah.
Okay, great. So let's look at how a good designer can actually position himself or position him on herself for this position. So how do you position yourself to get into some of these startups, like in times of preparation when you're looking for your next role?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think first join growthdesigners.co job board. So a little plug there, but we're actively putting a lot of jobs on there. But to position yourself as a growth designer to join a fast growing early stage startup, I don't think it's any different than typical job searches, networking, things like that, reaching out, talking to folks, Slack communities, on LinkedIn, all that kind of good stuff. And also just kind of making yourself known and available. We live kind of in a content creation day, like, maybe hop on Emmanuel's podcast and put yourself out there.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think it's,
definitely.
I think growth design is just I mean, it is a specialization within design, but it's It's kind of I feel like you kind of just declare it as yourself. No one's going to magically, put the sword on both shoulders and say you are now a growth designer, and you know, like you may get staffed on a growth design team as a younger product designer, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm doing growth. I have no idea what growth is, and you may not like it, and you may move away from it, or you may love it, and you may say like, this is what I want to be. At that point, you're making a decision to become a growth designer, and then from there, it's the same kind of job, kind of search, as well as networking that you would need to get your next gig.
Yeah, so I think one aspect I would like you to sort of touch on is the aspect of, let's say, when you're preparing for interviews. Now, as a product designer, one of the things that's peculiar to being a product designer is that product designers are sort of more feature oriented, right? Sort of
Mm,
building an end-to-end experience, keen on more pushing out more features and getting stuff done. But why, as a growth designer, you have more of testing out those ideas, iteration, doing experimentation, trying to test what brings the most impactful and best solution.
yeah,
It's looking at design from different perspectives. So now, when you're trying to interview for some of this role, how best do you prepare? Because obviously, if you're coming from the product design field, definitely you can still fit into to such role, but what stands you out in terms of preparation, let's say like portfolio reviews, case studies? What are the things that can
yeah,
stand you out, that shows you, that can show the green light to the startups that this is a good fit for us?
yeah. This is a great question. So a few things. You're exactly right. The product designers are mostly focused on like feature delivery, maybe more focused on visual design, pixel perfection, that kind of a thing. I think for a growth designer, from the designers that I've hired in the past that have excelled as growth designers, you really want to see someone who's experimentally inclined, someone who's in your case studies, show all the iterations, show the failures. You want somebody who's humble, who can really kind of understand that failure is not a bad thing. It's just a learning point, right? We're bouncing from learning to learning, and not everyone's going to be a win, and that's okay. So I think a few things to pull out of that as well, just digging a little bit deeper, is making sure that you really kind of explain your thought processes, explain the tests, explain what happened, show the impact. And yeah, I think at the end of the day, that's some of the key elements of being a growth designer, is showing those iterations and then being humble.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think, just to summarize what you just said, I think one of the key thing also for someone coming into good design that doesn't sort of have that experience, the experience of experimentation or doing all those A/B testing. I think having a good mindset is just what you
Yeah,
just explained out there. Having that mindset, being able to know that failure, when you experiment, failure is not doesn't mean that what you are a failure. In that sense, it just shows that you need to just tweak a little bit on things and just get the best impact. I think having that good mindset is very, very key for someone coming into the growth field or the growth specialization area of specialization afresh. So looking at education, right? What are those important, will I say, courses out there, or let's say communities, for a good designer to really thrive, to grow more? What are communities out there that are quite impactful for that you advise a good designer who is already doing that and someone who is coming into the field? What are communities, what are courses that are out there that you would sort of recommend?
yeah. Another plug for growthdesigners.co. We have a lot of great resources on the website. Soon to launch, we'll also have a fellows program where you can come and learn and be part of a course. I believe a 6-week course, and we'll be launching that later this year. And so that's the first thing I would say. And just to double tap into that too, like when I first joined the growth designers community, I helped Lex lift the Slack group off the ground. Like I am workspace owner there, mostly because I volunteered early on, and I would encourage you to do that as well. Volunteer, because everyone's still learning. I'm still learning. Everybody in their career needs to still be learning. So this is all key, and I think volunteering and putting yourself out there is really going to help you to do that. I'd say secondly, the other big resource is Reforge. That, of course, is widely known. You see their stuff all over the place, and that's because it's really good. So I would point you to Reforge. If your company can pay for it, that's great. If not, consider if it's a personal expense you want to make, but you will not regret that, because the more informed you are on loops, and the general frameworks that they put out there, the better you're going to be as a growth designer because they really are the industry gold standard. And then outside of that, I would say, growth.design is great too. They have those little micro courses that with their Bitmojis, good stuff. I haven't taken their course, but they're always fun. You learn a little psychological principle here and there. So I always enjoy those.
Yeah, definitely. I think those are really great resources out there. Honestly, just like to touch like a little bit on what you said, I think the growthdesigner.co is an amazing community for anybody who wants to start out their journey as a growth designer. They just have to be on that community because being amidst people of the same mindset really helps you a lot. You can really throw questions
Yeah.
out there. You get tons of questions, so you can't just be alone. And definitely Reforge. That's one of my. I'm sort of enrolling in that course this month. So I'm super excited. I'm looking forward to taking the course. And also, one of the foundational stuff you talked about was design. And I think it's one of the easily accessible course out there for anybody to join. And some of those their case studies are very, very juicy and gives you that lens of growth. And I think that's absolutely profound out there. Yeah. So
No, but I did just want to I just wanted to kind of add on to that last point there is that, yeah, I mean, when I was early on in my growth design career, I felt like I got so excited when I found growthdesigners.co because I felt like I found my people, right? Like
yeah.
I studied business and then I taught myself design. This was, early 2010s where UX was still kind of this fuzzy career path that no one really understood, except maybe at some of the bigger companies. But for me, it was very much like uncharted territory. And I always felt like, oh, well, I've studied business, I understand business strategy, and I'm learning design. How do I marry these two? And I think having fallen into the growth, like when I was originally introduced to the growth designers community, I just felt like, wow, these are my people. I feel like I can get a lot from this community. And indeed I have. So for any of those listeners out there who are considering like getting really involved, I would just kind of give you an extra nudge to get involved because the more you give in that community, the more you get. And giving is just simply, asking a question. You
Yeah.
don't even have to really giving, quote unquote, is just engagement more so than anything.
Absolutely, absolutely. I would ensure I had the links to join the community, all of that links to the show notes, so that folks that listen to this podcast can jump on the community and also had the link to Reforge and Good Does Design. So bringing the podcast to a close right now, let's just run through some lightning questions. It's going to be 3 questions, and I would like you to answer them as fun as you can. So the first question is, if you were not a designer, what will you have been, or what profession will you?
I grew up, I wanted to be an architect, but I went to a college that didn't have architecture and like an architecture program. I'm so glad I didn't because I've heard just that it's so hard to make it in the world of architecture. I've always loved urban planning, things like that. Physical, I think part of me too is like working in the digital world. Sometimes I just like to work with my hands. I love like woodworking and stuff like that. And so maybe designing physical objects as an industrial designer or an architect or an urban planner, like these types of physical environments to me would also they really appeal. And I think in part because like I want to step away from the pixels a lot of times.
Absolutely. Okay, great. The second question is, what are the top 3 products that you use day to day that you love? Like the top 3 products that you love?
That's a good question. So I just had a kid a year ago, so I'm a new dad, and I use this baby tracking app, and we like have inputted almost everything our baby has eaten in the last year and like all the sleep cycles, and so I just have a lot of data analytics around my baby. So my son was like, again, like speaking to the business kind of like data side of me, I love looking at some of the data visualization around my son's life, and it's called Nara Baby App. I don't know how they monetize this, so I know they're selling my data somewhere, but they have never ever tried to upsell me, which has been so curious to me because they're obviously, spending money to build this and maintain it. But I don't know how they're monetizing. Probably just selling my data to formula companies. So that would be one. And then other than that, I guess on the same theme of babies, we have a Wise Cam. In fact, the app kind of sucks, but the service is great. But the digital aspect of it is not great. Anyways, I digress there.
Okay. What about the third one? It's 3.
Oh, You got me. Yeah, one more. Strava. I love Strava. I'm a huge endurance sport person. I don't really race or anything, but I just, on any given sunny day, I put spandex on and go ride my bike for miles and miles.
Okay, perfect. So the last question is, what are the top three books that you loved that you would like to recommend to code designers out there?
Oh, this is a good question. I think Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman first comes to my mind. It's about just economic or kind of behavioral economics in general and how people make decisions. That would be my first recommendation. That one like fundamentally shifted the way I looked at design. I'd say there's some other classics out there within the industry of like Don't Make Me Think or by Krug, Steve Kruger, I think is his name. And then lastly, I'd have to jump on my Goodreads. I'm spacing on any good design kind of. I mean, Molly's book, you know, she has her growth design book that I guess I would, in lieu of the theme and the topic here, I'd put a plug for her.
Okay, yeah. Also, I think I've read that book too. Also, I can't just remember the name right now. Yeah, okay. I think I'll add it to the show notes definitely, so that for folks out there that really want to check it out. So, thanks so much, Scott, for the time. What will be your closing thoughts or any advice out there for any designers?
Early designers, I would say, just don't give up. It can often feel like imposter syndrome, and it can often feel like there's so many people doing so many cool things, and you know, you may get frustrated with just the day to day at whatever organization you're at. And even if you're just trying to break into design or break into growth design, just keep working on it. And over time, over the course of a couple of years, 5, 10 years, I mean, things happen. So you'll be totally fine. Just keep working at it.
Absolutely. Don't give up. Keep working at it. Thanks so much, Scott. I really appreciate those times and the value that you've put out there. Thanks so much. And also big thank you to everyone who has taken time to listen to this episode. If you found this very valuable, please do well to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, on any of your favorite podcast app. Also, you can consider giving us some sort of review and leaving some comments on the podcast. See you in the next episode. Thank you.